Putin was so focused on the maps of the 20th century that he lost the greatest treasure of the 21st century. He didn't lose it in Ukraine, he lost it much further north, in the Arctic Ocean. For Putin, this is not just ice and water. This was Russia's future treasury. Nearly $25 trillion worth of oil, natural gas, and rare earth elements. The one vital route that could change the world's trade flows. It was Moscow's ultimate project to erase the Suez and Panama canals. Now, it is $1 trillion prison surrounded by NATO missiles and filled with Chinese debt securities. Russia had been trying to reach warm seas for 300 years, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean. But, as fate would have it, the answer to that 300-year-old dream was not in the warm seas. Russia's real power lay in the harsh cold of the north, in the ice fortress. For years, Putin built this region as the Northern Fortress, untouchable, impregnable, Russia's eternal property. And in 2021, on the Kremlin's strategic maps, this ocean was marked as a Russian lake. But today, a single intelligence report leaked from the Onega Shipyard and causing an earthquake in the Kremlin corridors turned Putin's 300-year-old dream into a nightmare. Ships are missing, broken, routes are closed. Now, while fighting to take a town, Putin is on the verge of losing the 21st century's greatest geopolitical prize, the Arctic Ocean. First, you need to understand what is being lost. What lies beneath the Arctic? The Middle East of the future is not deserts, but glaciers. The war economy strained Russia's engine. For every inch of mud gained in the south, an ocean was sacrificed in the north. Russia's $15 trillion potential turned into a $5 trillion loss. To perform an autopsy on this strategic disaster, we must first turn our attention to that small but vital point on the map, the Onega Shipyard. This was the production base for Putin's Arctic strategy. However, reports today show that this base has been turned into a graveyard. The cancellation of the Onega Shipyard's flagship project, Icebreaker 7, and the shipyard's near bankruptcy triggered systemic necrosis in Russian industry. For years, Kremlin propaganda talked about the invincibility of Russian icebreakers. "We are the masters of the ice," they said. But when the cranes stopped at Onega, that domestic and national lie collapsed. The truth was this: Russia's Arctic vision depended on a life support system that was 80% reliant on Western technology. The massive propellers that enabled those ships to break through the ice? French engineering. The engines that powered those ships? Made in Finland. Navigation, radar, sensors? All from the West. When the war in Ukraine began, the West pulled the plug. The French didn't supply the propellers, the Finns didn't supply the engines. Russian engineers were left alone in those cold hangars with unfinished, heartless piles of metal. It was reported that the parts brought in from China cracked in the Arctic cold and couldn't withstand the pressure. Result? The Icebreaker 7 project was cancelled. Without icebreakers, the northern sea route freezes in winter. If the route freezes, Russia's trade with Asia dream ends. Russia is trapped in its own ocean. The shutdown of Russian shipyards triggered a domino effect. The first domino to fall was the Northern Sea Route, NSR. Geographically, this route is revolutionary. Russia's Arctic dream was not just about breaking ice. The real goal was to cut off the lifeline of global trade, namely the Suez and Panama canals. The math was clear and ruthless. The NSR shortens the distance between Asia and Europe by 40% compared to the Suez Canal. The 21,000-kilometer route is reduced to 12,800 kilometers. This meant a 30% savings in fuel costs and a 15-day advantage in delivery time. Furthermore, compared to the Panama Canal, the NSR is 30 to 40% shorter on Europe-Asia-Pacific routes, saving 10 to 15 days and reducing costs by 25 to 30%. For the logistics world, this was the holy grail. Russia's plan was to operate the planet's only safe highway in a world where the Panama Canal was struggling with drought and the Suez Canal was blocked by Houthi missiles. For China, this route was the Polar Silk Road. It was an escape ticket from the American naval blockade in the Strait of Malacca, the instability in Suez, and the high prices in Panama. For Russia, it meant billions of dollars in transit fees per year and a unique geopolitical lever. Vladimir Putin planned to move 80 million tons of cargo through this route by 2024, aiming to rival Panama and Suez. But today, that alternative highway has collapsed. There is a simple rule in shipping: no safety, no trade. An Arctic route without icebreaker escorts is the world's most dangerous gamble. But to understand why Russia's Arctic dream died, it's not enough to look at the icy gates of the Onega Shipyard. We need to turn the camera a little further inside, to the heart of Russian industry, to Yaroslavl and St. Petersburg. Reports leaking out of Yaroslavl show the human face of this collapse. In this industrial city, critical to Russia's engine and parts production, workers have not been paid for months. While the Kremlin poured the budget into the defense industry to build tanks, it bled dry the civilian shipbuilding industry and its supply chain. The most shameful symbol of this industrial suicide occurred in the shipyards of St. Petersburg. A Russian ship, boasting superpower ambitions, sank in August in the port of St. Petersburg. Not in an ocean storm, but before its construction was even complete. Why? Because qualified personnel were sent to the front lines, those left behind were not paid, and safety protocols were thrown out the window in the name of speed. The cancellation of the Icebreaker 7 project at the Onega Shipyard is therefore no surprise. Now, far from reaching the planned number of 48, Russia's icebreaker fleet has fallen to 41 due to existing malfunctions and a shortage of parts. Now, there are no new ships, there are no repairs. Russia's shipbuilding capacity is dead. Now, the project that was supposed to be the nightmare of Suez and Panama has turned into a joke due to the incompetence of Russian industry. Why? Because global logistics giants won't entrust their trillion-dollar goods to ships bolted together by Yaroslavl workers who are unpaid, hungry, and angry. Insurance companies, seeing ships sinking on their own in the port of St. Petersburg, can only laugh at Russia's promise of a safe route. Putin's war economy has strained the country's production engine, so much that the civilian shipping sector has gone bankrupt due to lack of resources. This chain of failures, stretching from Onega to St. Petersburg, has wiped out Russia's chance of becoming an alternative to Panama and Suez. So, who filled Russia's safe highway void? This is where the second and more destructive domino, energy exports, comes in. Russia's massive LNG projects, Arctic LNG 2, on the Yamal and Gaidan peninsulas were built on this route. Extracting the gas is not enough. It must be transported. However, South Korean shipyards stopped delivering the ice-class tankers they were building for Russia due to sanctions. Russia's own shipyards, Onega and Zvezda, were unable to produce these ships due to a lack of technology. The result? Gas is being produced at facilities that cost billions of dollars to build, but there are no ships to transport it. This gas has become a dead stock with no buyer. This situation is creating a massive strangulation in Russia's energy revenues. And right in the middle of this crisis, the silent giant, Norway, stepped onto the stage and dealt Russia a fatal blow. While Moscow was grappling with its own logistical nightmare, Norway brought the Johan Castberg field in the Arctic fully online. This timing was no coincidence. Seeing Europe's energy hunger, Oslo quietly and deeply filled the market void. Today, more than 30% of the European gas market is under Norwegian control, while Russia's share has fallen to 13% and is rapidly approaching zero. This is not just a market loss, it is the forcible removal of Russia's energy card. While Moscow searched for markets, Oslo closed them. Thus, the new guardians of the North began to represent the Western and safe alternative to Russia's chaotic and dangerous route. If the halt of the icebreaker projects and the collapse of the trade route were merely an economic disaster, Putin might have weathered it. However, when we look at the bigger picture, that giant chessboard, what we see is not a bankruptcy, but a full-fledged military and geopolitical encirclement. Economic collapse is bad, but military encirclement is deadly. Before the war, Russia controlled 53% of the Arctic coastline and had declared Murmansk and the Kola Peninsula untouchable under its bastion defense doctrine. This was the refuge of nuclear submarines. But then came the invasion of Ukraine. Putin claimed he went to war to create a buffer zone in Ukraine, but at the end of the day, he found himself inside an iron ring in the Arctic. Russia's legendary northern fortress fell. The architecture of this siege becomes terrifyingly clear when looking at the map. According to the US Geological Survey's Circum-Arctic Resource Appraisal Report, the figures are staggering. 13% of the world's oil, 30% of its natural gas, and the rare elements that power those famous F-35s are in the Arctic. And Russia? With the longest coastline, it owned the lion's share of this pie, worth nearly $15 trillion, its title deed. This was the sole guarantee that would sustain Russia for the next century, transforming it from a gas station into a global superpower, at least until 2022. But then came Western sanctions. Finland and Sweden joining NATO created an earthquake in Arctic geopolitics. Before the war, there was a balance in the Arctic Council. Now, 7 of the 8 members are NATO members. The Arctic Ocean has effectively become a NATO lake. Murmansk, Russia's nuclear heartland, is now in a kill box. While Norway and new NATO member Finland exert pressure from the west by land, the US and British navies have arrived at the gates of the northern fortress by sea. The moment Russian submarines leave port, they are detected by NATO's underwater listening networks and patrol aircraft. They are no longer the hunters of the ocean, they are now the prey, trapped in their own home. As the European front locks down, a feast of wolves has been set up on the other side of the Atlantic. The North American bloc, the US and Canada, seeing Russia's weakness, has moved to seize its share of the Arctic. Donald Trump's idea of buying Greenland was ridiculed, but today we see more clearly the strategic genius behind this idea. Greenland is not just an icy island, it is North America's unsinkable aircraft carrier. By modernizing the Tula Air Base in Greenland, the US has opened its eyes to any missile threat that Russia might pose from the north. Canada, meanwhile, has made a more aggressive move. Ottawa has declared the Northwest Passage its internal waters and is completely upgrading the NORAD radar systems together with the US. There are no longer any blind spots against Russian missiles, and the most lethal move, the F-35s. The US Air Force has permanently relocated its F-35 stealth fighter fleets to Alaska as of 2025. This puts Russia's easternmost tip directly within the threat range across the Bering Strait. Russia is now surrounded not only from the west, but also from the east and north. The North American bloc is waiting like a vulture, ready to fill Russia's void in the Arctic. NATO locked the door, Norway stole the market, the US pointed its weapons. But the most humiliating blow for Russia came from China, which it had declared its unlimited friend. This is the most ruthless form of diplomatic chess. China is not an ally for Russia. It is a predator, waiting for its weakened prey. This is where the geo-economic trap comes into play. China is actually a loan shark for Russia, and Russia is now a helpless customer, unable to pay its debts. Beijing began infiltrating the region by defining itself as a near-Arctic state. Russia's Arctic dominance had only one address it could knock on: China. Russia is now forced to charter Chinese ships to trade in its own territorial waters and transport goods in its own ocean. Russia's sovereignty has been transformed into China's lease agreement. China is ruthlessly exploiting this vulnerability. Russia is closing the oil and gas it extracts from the Arctic at nearly cost, 30 to 40% below global market prices. Russia is no longer China's strategic partner, but its raw material colony. Ports are being transferred to Chinese companies, mining rights sold to Beijing. The northern territories that Russia has defended with bloodshed for 300 years are being sold piece by piece to China economically. Putin, fleeing NATO, has fallen into the dragon's mouth. This is not a partnership. This is a foreclosure. When we calculate the cost of this destruction, the picture that emerges is horrific. The total value of Arctic reserves is nearly $25 trillion. In 2021, Russia's share was around $15 trillion and 80% regional dominance. By 2025, that dominance had fallen below 50% and is rapidly eroding. Just in the last 3 years, when you factor in the delays in the cancelled Arctic LNG-2 project, production halted due to the cutoff of Western technology, and sales made at a loss to China. $5 trillion. Yes, nearly $5 trillion of Russia's future has evaporated. The Arctic was designed to be Russia's future. Now it has turned into a cold, vast prison with no way out, its resources exploited by others. Putin was so focused on the maps of the 20th century that he lost sight of the geography of the 21st century. For every inch of mud gained in the south, an ocean was sacrificed in the north. A potential $15 trillion turned into a $5 trillion loss. The Onega Shipyard became a metal graveyard, and the northern fortress turned into a wreck. This money was the Russian pensioners' salary. This money was the modernization of the Russian army. This money was Russia's sovereignty. All of it was crushed under the Arctic ice. History will not write the Ukraine war as just a black war. It will write it as the place where Russia's future froze to death. The game is over.